American Horror Story ventures to New Orleans in a fan-favorite season full of witchy one-liners and extreme creative liberties concerning real-life historical figures, and I can't wait to dive deep into what is, without a doubt, the densest season of television I've covered on this channel. But before we get started, as usual with the season's production history, I want to first take a moment to thank this video's sponsor, Manta Sleep. A full night of uninterrupted rest can really work like a charm to reset your mind and body, and with the help of Manta Sleep, I've been getting some of the best sleep of my life. Manta Sleep's silk sleep mask with adjustable eye cups, alongside their travel-friendly white noise machine, have both become a staple to my nighttime routine, and together they are extremely effective at blocking out light, noise, and it's the most comfortable sleep mask I've ever tried. If you travel a lot, if you've got a noisy household, or if you're just wanting to improve your sleep, mantasleep.com has got you covered. Their cooling eye cups have also been providing a lot of relief for me during this allergy season, and honestly, Manta Sleep is bound to have a product for your specific sleep need. Go to mantasleep.com to see their variety of sleep-enhancing products, and use my code SKYGUY at checkout to get 10% off your order. And if you're catching this video early, Manta Sleep is running a bunch of holiday sales right now, so make sure you go to mantasleep.com to take advantage, and don't forget to use my code SKYGUY, SKYGAE, at checkout. That's mantasleep.com and my code SKYGAE for 10% off your order. If you caught that content warning at the start of this video, the season is extremely ambitious with the amount of taboo and shock value that it goes for. As we know from Murder House, especially in these early seasons, shock value is a huge part of the show's DNA, and this season occasionally flashes back to the 19th century, and it uses the character of Delphine Lalaurie, a real person who tortured and mutilated her slaves, as a source of that shock value. Additionally, the first episode involves another rape scene that sets off a lot of the season's events, so if you're familiar with my deep dives, I will be sharing all my thoughts, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and also bring in some other sources and voices to the conversation as well. So if any of that sounds like too much for you, no worries, feel free to turn away, but I will also be trying to keep this light, as this season somehow is the show's most comedic up to this point somehow. And as always, it has a lot of fun production details, guest stars, and trivia that I will be getting into as well. American Horror Story was officially renewed for its third season on November 15th, 2012, which was right in between the airing of Asylum's memorable two-part Anne Frank episode. Along with this renewal, Jessica Lange's return was also confirmed, which was an agreement that came with some requests. Filming would commence in July of 2013, and per the request of Jessica Lange herself, the production and the plot itself would be based in New Orleans, Louisiana. Murphy was quoted saying that he got Lange to agree to season 3 by doing everything she asked. That included a move to NOLA, and also to not be in the nun garb that she was restricted to for most of season 2. He also said that he wanted the season to be about witches before Jessica's request to set the season in New Orleans. I knew that we wanted to do witches and that they were from Salem, but I didn't want to do it in Salem. Jessica kept saying she wanted to do it in New Orleans, so I had to make that work. With this quote in mind, the fact that a lot of the location-based elements of the season do kind of feel almost like an afterthought, it starts to make a little bit of sense. As usual, the marketing team whipped up memorable teasers and posters, but the best one has got to be the cast teaser, giving viewers their first glimpses of the season's all-star cast in character. And if you're an AHS fan who's been living under a rock for about a month and a half, season 13 of American Horror Story is happening, and a good chunk of the cast members from Coven are returning. So if you like this all-star cast, you should definitely check out my new news video that breaks down each and every of the newly announced cast members for season 13, which will air in 2026. AHS Coven is a season loosely based in the mythos of 19th century New Orleans, but it leaves historical accuracy in the dust in favor of vague witch hierarchies and stellar fiery monologues from some of the best and most celebrated actors in the business. With its constant references to both icons of historical prominence and religious prominence, though, you would think that the show would put a bit more care particularly into perpetuating Hollywood stereotypes about voodoo, a real religion with several varying sectors that is no more supernatural than any religion you or I have grown up with. Instead of taking the chance to educate its audiences on lesser-known aspects of American history, like the show did briefly with Sal Mineo in Murder House and the systemic abuse of those deemed mentally ill in asylum or the AIDS epidemic in NYC, but instead the historical elements rely mostly on imagined or hyperbolized accounts of these figures. It at times feels pointless and aimless in that regard. That is not to say that the show doesn't attempt to tackle serious issues like slavery in the United States and its long-lasting effects, but as American Horror Story tends to do, it also lacks taste and a cohesive through line. That said, overlooking missed opportunities and inaccurate historical contexts, Coven creates its own encroaching mythos of modern-day witches that allows for the season to truly shine in its large character moments and set pieces. And it is these vibrant characters and supernatural circumstances that make Coven such a standout season with a lasting impact. With that said, let's now begin to unpack a truly twisted premiere episode. With what certainly was American Horror Story's most ambitious concept yet, let's see how it all came together come premiere night. Beginning in 1834, Coven first introduces us to the show's version of a real-life serial killer, Delphine Lalaurie, played by the one and only Kathy Bates in her AHS debut. This wasn't Bates' first dabble into the horror genre. Quite famously, her starring role as Annie Wilkes in 1990's Misery would win her an Academy Award and a Golden Globe. This role required Kathy Bates to play the villain as a superfan of an author who she ends up kidnapping and torturing. This famous role most definitely informed the choice to cast Kathy Bates as one of the most notorious killers and torturers in American history, Delphine Lalaurie, whose horrendous torture of her slaves was uncovered during a house fire in 1834. However, again, AHS takes a plethora of creative liberties with all of its historical figures, particularly in this season. But if you're looking to know the real story of Delphine Lalaurie, I highly recommend this video essay I came upon by A Popular History of Unpopular Things. I've linked to it in the comments below. The video basically explains how the true and undeniably heinous crimes of Lalaurie are a bit shadowed by the yellow journalism as well as fictional reimaginings at the time. So the torture and imprisonment of her slaves is accurate. However, AHS does choose to adapt the most violent and probably outright fictional accounts of the Lalaurie torture chamber. And later on, once you see Lalaurie crossing paths with Marie Laveau, just know you're in complete fanfiction territory, as the two women most likely never crossed paths. All of that to state the obvious, don't come to AHS as if it's a documentary, but I don't blame you for being surprised at how little of its historical fiction elements rely on true history, but I digress. During a party at the Lalaurie mansion, the show uses silent-era techniques to let us know that Delphine's daughter, Pauline, has eyes for one of her family's slaves, named Bastien. Later, in her lavish bedroom, Delphine paints her face with blood, which she explains is supposed to tighten her skin, but she rushes downstairs to beat her daughter after discovering that Pauline and Bastien ended their nights in some sort of sexual encounter. Delphine spins a story that Bastien took advantage of Pauline, but Bastien insists that it was actually the other way around. Pauline came on to him, and he is actually spoken for. Delphine beats Bastien and declares he be sent upstairs, where we discover the gruesome torture prison where Delphine imprisons many other slaves. The extent of the torture shown in this attic is extremely intense, beyond cruel and unusual.
Why are you doing this to us?
Because I can.
after Bastien is severely beaten off-screen, Delphine instructs the severed head of a bull to be placed on his.
However did you think this up?
My great literacy began with Greek mythology.
Analyzing this scene in which a black man is falsely accused of rape and then literally transformed into a mythical beast in her paper The Horror of Rape on Cable TV, Alicia Cross writes, Delphine's punishment of choice is an unusual form of torture. She cuts off the head of a bull and forces him to wear it as his own, turning him into a minotaur. This flashback exposes a racist myth about the hypersexuality and sexually violent nature of black men, and how it was used to justify their persecution. Turning Bastien into a half-man, half-beast quite literally represents Madame Lalarie's racist view of black men as animalistic. Part of the project of this season of AHS, and a location of the deep cultural critique it offers, is to use America's racist past as horror. First Scene provides such a framework. Needless to say, this is one of the most intense and revolting scenes to air on this show, and episode writers Murphy and Falchuk are not even close to being done with upping the level of shock value from seasons 1 and 2. With a 19th century antagonist established, the show cuts to its third rendition of the show's iconic opening title sequence with all sorts of creepy and cryptic visuals that I break down in my new video where I analyzed and ranked all 12 of the show's title sequences. Depending on when you're watching this, that video is out now on my Patreon, or if you see this card pop up on your screen now, that means that it's on YouTube now as well, so make sure you check that out when you're done here. But back from the intro, we center ourselves in then present day 2013. We meet Zoe Benson, played by returnee Thaisa Farmiga, in her second AHS season, skipping Asylum. Zoe and her boyfriend, Charlie, start to get steamy, and we learn that this is Zoe's first time having sex. Things go horribly wrong though, as Charlie starts to bleed from his face and die. Cut to a nice parallel with the pilot episode of Murder House with Thaisa's first AHS role, Violet Harmon. Like Violet, Zoe is traveling from one home to a new one full of a long history of supernatural horrors. She has been sent to a special boarding school, as we are informed through a brief flashback that Zoe's mother had been keeping a big family secret. She tells Zoe that her grandmother, too, killed anybody who she had sex with. It seems that Zoe's mom knew this ability runs in the family, but we establish here that magic doesn't show up in every generation. Nonetheless, Zoe's a witch, as she narrates, and she clarifies that those killed during the Salem witch trials were not witches, not even in this universe, since the real witches were too cunning and powerful to be caught. During this narration, we get some silent film-esque inserts of the Salem executions themselves, a visual motif that luckily continues during the later half of the season. As Zoe says, despite being admittedly understudied on the topic, she says that after the witch trials, many of the real witches fled south, and that's how New Orleans became, quote, the new Salem in the AHS universe. The slight flashback continues as Zoe is taken away by men in black, and we are introduced to the most fashionable character in AHS history, Myrtle Snow, in Frances Conroy's third role on the show.
These stripes, I'm just bad for tartan.
In some more Murder House parallels, Zoe finally arrives at the boarding school, which is named Miss Robichaux's Academy for Exceptional Young Ladies. We later learn this was the name of a boarding school that preceded the witches moving in, but they kept the name as a cover. Once inside, Zoe is subjected to a hazing ritual by the other girls, but more importantly, the camera eats up some wide angles of the lavishly designed interior, void of color, but rich in character, size, and beauty. This is some of the best and my favorite work done by the set designers and production designers on the show, and the camera does not let it go to waste throughout the season. Once Zoe is scared onto a table, one of the girls raises a knife above her as a mysterious force controls the fire in the room. But soon enough, that girl puts down the knife and unmasks herself as...
Holy shit, are you...
Madison Montgomery, movie star.
Shit. When's the last time you made a movie, girl?
This was Emma Roberts' first role on AHS, a relationship that helped establish her as a modern-day Scream Queen, alongside her similarly memorable turn as Jill in Scream 4, 2 years prior to Coven, as well as a strikingly similar character to Madison in the 2015 series Scream Queens. Soon after, the other girls unmask and we meet Queenie, played by Gabri Sidibe, also in her first of several AHS appearances. Coven occurred just 4 years into Sidibe's acting career after breaking out in Lee Daniels' 2009 film Precious, which earned her nominations in nearly every major award ceremony, including the Academy Awards. Alongside Queenie and Madison is Nan, played by Jamie Brewer, returning in her second AHS season since portraying Adelaide in Murder House. Right on cue, a character named Cordelia Fox enters, played by Sarah Paulson, in her third AHS role, but only her second as a part of the main ensemble after her star-turning performance 1 season prior in Asylum. Cordelia is the headmistress, so she shows Zoe around and gives her an oral history of the school. She tells of Marianne Wharton, a fictional suffragette who bought this property and was what Cordelia calls the reigning supreme at the time. Cordelia speaks of as many of 60 young witches learning at this school back in the day, but nowadays it is just these 4.
We're a dying breed, Zoe. Many of the families who knew they carried the bloodline made a choice not to reproduce.
In all of the times the show has revisited the witches, I'm surprised they never wanted to explore the earlier history of the Salem witches in New Orleans, especially during the time of nearly 60 witches residing at this school. Cordelia also tells the tragic tale of a modern witch by the name of Misty Day, portrayed by Lily Rabe in her third consecutive AHS role. Misty had the ability to bring a soul back to life, but her religious community took her power for sin, so they tied her up, doused her in gasoline, and burnt the witch.
We are under siege, ladies.
So what's a supreme?
Sure, Zoe, let's just get all the exposition out all at once. Cordelia explains that an average witch is the master of only one power, but a supreme is a master of them all.
Are you the supreme?
No.
In fact, the Supreme is Cordelia's mother, Fiona Good, played by Jessica Lange in her third consecutive AHS role, who we meet at a genetics laboratory in Los Angeles, where a doctor shows her a serum that brought a monkey back from death.
I'll have what she's having.
Doctor informs Fiona that human trials aren't for another 2 years, but much like Constance, Fiona quickly resorts to blackmail to get what she wants, stating that the doctor's entire success is built off of her husband's money. Cut to 5 doses into the miracle drug, and Fiona is not happy with the slow progression of the results, so she demands higher dosage. Doctor threatens to resign, and Fiona uses her supreme powers to close and lock all of the doors. She then uses her go-to move and slams the doctor against the wall, before making out with him, which slowly turns into her sucking the complete and utter life out of him. And once she's done, she is now pleased with her reflection, but even that is short-lived. During dinner at Robichaux's, we meet the house's butler, Spalding, played by Dennis O'Hare in his second AHS role. As Madison torments him, we learn that he is mute. Zoe tells the other girls what happened to Charlie, her ex-boyfriend, and we learn the powers of the other girls. Nan is clairvoyant, Madison can move things with her mind, a power she recently used to kill a director she didn't get along with, which was the stunt that landed her here at Robichaux's. As for Queenie, she can inflict whatever she does to her own body onto another without taking any of the consequences.
What? I don't feel nothing. I'm a human voodoo doll.
Speaking about the inspirations for the young witch's powers in an interview with Vulture, Ryan Murphy said, "They were things that were attributed to witches back in Salem. One had been accused of f***ing someone to death. The truth of the matter is the guy was probably hemophiliac and got too excited. Clairvoyance, the power to read minds, the power to move objects, those are old, tried and true things that witches were burned for. The one we took liberties with and that I love is Queenie's power, the human voodoo doll, that ability to do something to yourself and have it transferred to someone else is a voodoo-esque power that some voodoo witches do have. We just gave it to a Salem witch. And Queenie's gonna be tempted by that Marie Laveau, Angela Bassett voodoo magic. Just wait. Listen, I have no idea what voodoo witch he's talking about in regards to Queenie's power, and it points to the show's general ignorance towards Louisiana voodoo that we will get into later on. In the school's greenhouse/laboratory, Cordelia mixes a potion before being scared by her mother. Oh, and she has a cat. Harkening on what Murphy says is Cordelia's deep-rooted abandonment issues after Fiona dropped her off at Robichaux's as a girl, a choice that Fiona made because it was the same place she was sent at that age.
You dumped me here. You were sent to an elite boarding school. Boo-hoo-hoo-hoo-hoo.
Cordelia kicks Fiona out of Robichaux's, but Fiona insists on staying to help train this new group of witches. This choice, as she explains, is inspired by the execution of Misty Day, which was not far from New Orleans.
Get Salem all over again. There is a storm coming.
Fiona claims all Cordelia is teaching the girls is to hide. But as Fiona argues, in this era of social media, there is no more hiding.
With Twitter and Facebook, that if a witch does anything at all, she won't be videotaped and turned into some viral freak show like a dog who says, I love you.
No.
Some viral what? Cordelia protests Fiona teaching the girls
No.
and threatens to call the Witches' Council over the matter.
When are you gonna die and stop ruining my life?
Then Madison lends Zoe one of her outfits and they sneak out to a nearby frat party where a different frat arrives in a party bus. Their leader is Kyle Spencer, played by AHS King Evan Peters in his third AHS role. Kyle explains that the school's administration is on their necks, so he'll be relatively sober and keeping an eye out to ensure the Kappa Lambda Gamma brothers are on their best behavior tonight. Inside, former star-crossed lovers quickly become that once again, as Kyle and Zoe meet through the distortion of an ice sculpture. Upstairs, Madison meets Archie, Kyle's frat brother, who immediately drugs Madison and invites several other men to rape her. Kyle ends up walking in on this and flips out before Zoe finds Madison. The rapists head back to the party bus, where Archie knocks Kyle out cold. As the bus drives away, Zoe and Madison chase after them. Seven of the frat guys die in the bus crash caused by Madison's telekinesis, while 2 of them are hospitalized. Zoe explains to Madison that she was talking to Kyle all night, so he must have been innocent. Then it's the battle of the crass narcissist as Fiona and Madison start to bicker, which results in that go-to move from Fiona once again. Fiona then takes the witches on a field trip to a quote-unquote holy place for their order, Pop Fountain in City Park, New Orleans. They pass the Lalaurie mansion on the way, and Nan stops, drawn to the ground's history of great pain and suffering. Inside, the rest of the witches follow Nan, and Fiona literally does a Jedi mind trick to convince the tour guide to let them in for free.
You're giving us a tour for free.
Free, of course.
And the show gives us a very brief oral history of Delphine Lalaurie, who in reality fled to France after her crimes were discovered. But as we know, we are dealing with a completely alternate history, especially when it comes to the fate of Delphine Lalaurie, because in the AHS universe, she would never flee New Orleans. Instead, it would be these very grounds where she would die. In a flashback, we learn about the fictional meeting between Delphine Lalaurie and Marie Laveau. I'll tell you a bit more about the true history of Marie Laveau in just a bit, but Laveau is played by my favorite AHS alum, Angela Bassett, in her first role on the show. Before AHS Coven, Bassett broke through in the industry with the Tina Turner biopic, What's Love Got to Do With It, which earned her a Golden Globe Award and an Academy Award nomination. Bassett's Marie Laveau arrives at Delphine's doorstep, claiming to have a cure for her husband's wandering eyes, so she gives her what she claims is a love potion. Lalaurie drinks every last drop, but soon enough it's not quite agreeing with her, and Laveau watches as the torturess dies. As the tour guide simply puts it,
Unbeknownst to Madame Lalaurie, a slave she had brutally mutilated was Marie Laveau's lover, and she came to exact her revenge.
Laveau's lover was Bastien. After presumably killing Delphine, Marie finds Bastien and sobs. But the tour guide informs us that the body of Delphine was never actually found, and outside, Nan informs us that she's not quite that dead after all. Later, Zoe visits the 2 surviving frat guys from the crash who are in critical condition, hoping that one of them is Kyle. But she is disappointed to find Archie alive, the one who orchestrated the gang rape. So Zoe uses her powers and rapes the unconscious Archie in the hospital bed, knowing that this will also kill him, which it does. Elsewhere, based on Nan's tip, Fiona hires 2 guys to dig up the coffin of Delphine Lalaurie, who was alive down there all this time. Just in case you were doubting Nan, never doubt Nan.
Come on, Mary Todd Lincoln. I'll buy you a drink.
Honestly, this episode feels... Did I press record? Honestly, this episode feels so targeted towards that same teen Tumblr audience that devoured the Tate and Violet romance in Murder House, and that's because it very much was. But like I said in the intro, the episode really goes into some deep and dark places, whether it be what happens in the flashbacks or what happens at the frat party. But before we talk about the more complex elements of the episode, I do want to talk about the areas where the season really feels like it's raising the bar from the 2 that came before it. Set design, cinematography, casting, score, and the on-location shooting in New Orleans immediately make this season feel richer than the 2 that came before it, and while including intensely dark moments, the season's tone already feels different, relying more on fashion, comedy, and basically anything but subtlety within the frame. The episode has a ton of exposition, and it feels like it at times, but it does a good job of feeding us tiny bits of its witch mythology in a way that keeps the pace moving along nicely. Will the witch mythology ever really make sense in the end? Of course not. One element that already feels like an afterthought is the inclusion of voodoo. I mean, Queenie's powers just being a human voodoo doll is weird, right? I'm not the only one that finds that weird. She's the only one whose powers aren't based on the accused powers of those tried in Salem, yet she says she's a distant relative of Tituba, who was more or less accused of teaching children her powers of fortune-telling. So why aren't Queenie's powers more akin to Nan's telepathy instead of being that inaccurate representation of voodoo? Well, the obvious answer is that the writers of this season would much rather cling onto racist Hollywood stereotypes that link voodoo to some sort of black magic and satanic imagery than actually doing the research into a culture that lives in the area you're literally filming within. I find it a little lazy, especially when Ryan Murphy heavily promoted the season as the show's take on racism, when in the end it does have a pretty narrow lens. Another major element of this episode is the rape-revenge plotline involving Madison, the frat guys, and Zoe. As mentioned earlier, Zoe is positioned as the protagonist in the episode, and her ability to kill through sexual intercourse is the first thing established in the present-day timeline. So, as Alicia Cross says in her 2016 paper, The Horror of Rape on Cable TV, the episode does not employ the usual structure of rape-revenge storylines, which would be the victim transforming into the Avenger by the end of the story. But since Madison, strong in her magical ability, was already acting as the Avenger moments after her assault, the episode instead follows Zoe's transition into the Avenger, as she learns that the innocent Kyle died while Archie, the instigator, survived. That said, by relegating the revenge storyline to Zoe, who again has most of the narrative focus, Madison, on the other hand, the actual victim, does feel underwritten and underexplored. Zoe narrates about Madison's vulnerability while she is shown crying in the shower. But aside from brief conversations where Zoe literally shuts down Madison's perspective, we never truly get to hear how this pivotal night affected Madison as a person. And by the way, Madison's perspective that Zoe basically shuts down is that maybe Kyle wasn't so innocent. And I think this episode provides a good case for that evidence, because when we first meet Kyle, it's his speech to his other frat mates, and he's like, yo, the dean's on our necks, we gotta make sure we're on our best behavior this time, that means they've been in some shit before. I'm sure Kyle was implicated in that shit before, so I don't think Kyle is truly as innocent as Zoe thinks she is. And while Madison starts to have that conversation...
How can you be such a bitch?
Because I understand people. And that guy would have happily taken a turn on me if he had the chance.
No, that's bullshit. He wasn't like that.
Those guys were his frat brothers. It's guilt by association.
It is shut down, and narratively that conversation is also shut down. As I am unpacking the second half of the season, as I am filming this part of the video, if that makes sense, perhaps by the time part 2 of the deep dive comes out, I might have more complete feelings about that. Much like in Murder House, a major plotline of the season is kickstarted by a rape scene, but despite the severity and consequences of Coven's rape scene, the season's several other characters and storylines don't leave room for Madison's perspective to be explored at all. Episode 2 begins in the swamps as 2 Confederate flag-bearing hunters murder an alligator, but they leave it aside when they notice a wandering woman near their stash of more dead gators. The woman is none other than Misty Day, the witch we've heard has been burnt at the stake. Misty chastises the hunters for killing the gators before resurrecting them, and naturally the gators get revenge. During this scene, there is a radio playing Edge of 17 by Stevie Nicks. Back at Robichaux's, Madison apologizes to Zoe for killing Kyle, and in Fiona's new room, she has tied up the 226-year-old Delphine Lalaurie to a chair. We then flash back to 1 year ago when Queenie was dealing with some rude customers at a chicken shop. One man tests her patient so badly that she uses her magic to burn his arm. Back in the present, Queenie explains that the incident made the paper, which then caught Cordelia's attention. She also says,
I'm an heir to Tituba. She was a house slave in Salem. She was the first to be accused of witchcraft.
Tituba was one of the first 3 women to be tried for witchcraft after the children of the family she was enslaved to claimed to be fortune tellers. Despite accusations of Tituba teaching the girls voodoo, the young girls used European fortune-telling methods like egg whites in a glass of water, which have no traces to any of the various voodoo religions. While not incredibly documented, Tituba's role in the Salem witch trials is pivotal, and this season does not try to tell any of that story, to be honest, beyond this scene. The school then gets a visit by some detectives who question Zoe and Madison after the events at the frat party. When the detectives confront Zoe about visiting Archie in the hospital, and him subsequently dying of unknown causes, things get a little tense, and Zoe blurts out,
They gang raped her, and they got what they deserved.
Everyone here is a witch. I'm so sorry. Please don't send us to jail.
Fiona enters and uses her Jedi powers on the cops, and boom, problem solved, for now. Once she's through with the cops, Fiona mind slams Zoe and Madison against the wall and berates Zoe.
I couldn't toast a piece of bread with the heat they were putting on you.
Later, Madison and Zoe break into the morgue as Madison wants to resurrect Kyle to repay Zoe after piecing together what Zoe did to Archie. However, they discover that Kyle and his fraternity brothers didn't make it out of the bus crash in one piece. This gives Madison a sick idea.
We take the best boy parts, we attach them to Kyle's head, and we build the perfect boyfriend.
With almost no resistance from Zoe, the girls get to work on their own Frankenstein's monster. We then meet Cordelia's husband, Hank, at a doctor's appointment regarding Cordelia's fertility struggles. Cordelia says she refuses to use magic to fulfill her needs, otherwise she would be just like her mother. She also warns that magic that plays with life and death is dark and dangerous. Speaking of, Madison and Zoe are eventually successful in resurrecting their amalgamation of boy parts with the head of Kyle. Delphine tells Fiona what happened after she was poisoned by Marie Laveau. Marie and a mob hanged Delphine's daughters and revealed that the poison was actually an elixir to eternal life before burying her in the grave we found her in.
I'm sorry for your loss. You want a bite?
That brings Fiona to this hair salon in the 9th Ward, owned by the still living Marie Laveau.
Your kind and my kind have been going after each other for centuries.
Everything you got from us.
Marie claims that Tituba brought magic to the Salem witches, and before she was enslaved, she was of the Arawak tribe from South America and the Caribbean.
She learned the secrets of the other side from a 2,000-year-old line of shamans, necromancy. She gave it to your girls of Salem.
This idea that within the AHS world, the powers of the Salem witches originated from voodoo practitioners like Marie Laveau, tracing back to Tituba, is complete historical fan fiction. But regardless, Fiona refuses to believe that her magic originated from voodoo, so she changes the subject. She wants Marie's immortality elixir. The pair argue, and Fiona sets a bunch of wigs on fire and says,
It's nice to see you doing so well after all these years. I mean, maybe in another century, you could have 2 shithole salons.
At the school, Nan gets annoyed by Delphine.
You think too loud. Get out.
And she sets her free, but on her way out, she calls Queenie a slave and knocks her out with a sconce. Then Cordelia has quickly changed her mind off screen, and she and Hank perform a fertility ritual involving fire, lots of snakes, and of course, sex. During the intercourse, Cordelia's eyes turn entirely black in the same way Tate's did in Season 1, as well as Mary Eunice's did in Season 2. From my understanding, these eyes tend to indicate the presence or influence of the devil. On the highway, Zoe is jump scared by Misty Day in her back seat. And Kyle is behaving even less accustomed to life than Frankenstein's monster himself, so Misty takes them to her shack in the swamp where she listens to more Stevie Nicks and tends to Kyle's scars. She also explains that it was Zoe's magic that drew her to Zoe and Kyle, and her presence near the hospital seems to have had an influence on the success of Madison and Zoe's spell. When Zoe says she doesn't know who Stevie Nicks is, Misty calls Stevie the White Witch. Misty attempts to bond with Zoe over the Fleetwood Mac song Rhiannon, but Zoe takes this as her cue to leave, and Misty says she will help heal Frank and Kyle in the meantime. Marie Laveau discovers that Delphine Lalaurie has been freed, and we see that Bastien is also still alive, and he appears to have fully merged with the bullhead, seeing and breathing through it. Marie tells him,
You ain't never gonna believe who's back. We got some business to attend to.
Fiona finds a wandering Delphine on Bourbon Street who explains that she's seen hell down in that box. Time disappears, and all she saw was the faces of her daughters.
It's better. At least in death, you can't disappoint the ones you love.
Delphine asks Fiona if she can kill her, but Fiona says not so fast and threatens to bury her alive once more if she ever run away again. Tonally, the episode is a change of pace coming off of the intensity of how episode 1 ended, and the Frank and Kyle storyline all hinges on if you can really buy Madison Montgomery as a character. I think it has worked for me the several other times I've watched this season, solely due to how effortlessly and well Emma Roberts embodies the character. But as with these deep dives, I am trying to look at these seasons with a magnifying glass. I really do think these early episodes are lacking Madison's perspective. With a main cast member of the season, Evan Peters, his character is now a physical reminder of that night. I think there is more that could be done with this very unique scenario than the show is willing to do. We saw what happened to Madison that night, and now she is literally being haunted by the events of that night by her own doing, helping to bring the literal flesh and bones of these rapists back to life in the form of a literal beast. But like I said, outside of Madison's point of view, it does work, especially if you're not digesting the episodes the way I am for these deep dives. This episode also features the first encounter between Fiona and Marie Laveau, and it mostly calls attention to the racism and classism on Fiona's end. Practically all of their dialogue in that scene is about how Fiona views herself as this very, very wealthy person, and she views Marie Laveau as very poor. And the outright refusal to believe her magic could have been taught to her ancestors from voodoo practitioners. It does start to get in some Draco Malfoy white supremacy territory. Similarly, the episode introduces a season-long arc involving Queenie, the only black witch in the Coven, and Delphine Lalaurie, a racist torturer and murderer from the 19th century who is still extremely hateful and violent despite her current circumstances. When these two characters first meet, Delphine literally knocks her out cold, and yet the show still wants us to think Queenie would want to be around this bigot who literally tried to kill her on sight. But that egg will start to hatch later on in the season. Experiencing some insomnia, Fiona mixes some pills and potions and has a flashback to when she was once a student at Miss Robichaux's. It was 1971, and then Supreme Anna Lee Layton recalls the moment when she discovered that she was the Supreme. She says that the Supreme who preceded her, Mimi de Longpré, had called the Witches' Council to observe Anna Lee performing what are called the Seven Wonders. She elaborates that it is common for powerful witches to develop up to 4 powers, but to be the Supreme, you need to master all 7. Anna Lee is played by the multifaceted Christine Ebersole, who appeared alongside Jessica Lange 30 years before Coven, having a small role in Tootsie, and it was also around that time that she was a cast member on SNL. The actress playing young Fiona is Riley Volkel, who you might know nowadays for her roles on Chicago Med or The Originals, where she also played a witch in New Orleans. She also guest starred on Glee a year after appearing on Horror Story, which is crazy to think back of the time when Glee and AHS overlapped. Fiona says that she can tell that Anna Lee's power is fading, and she wants to attempt the 7 wonders.
Don't be a fool, you're still a child.
Their conversation turns into a quippy altercation, ending with Fiona slashing the throat of the Supreme. Before we cut back to the present, we are shown that the only witness to the murder was the butler, Spaulding. Present-day Fiona goes to a bar to pick up a man, but is disappointed that her usual magnetism is not working, so we later see her visiting a plastic surgeon. Zoe visits Kyle's mom, Alicia, someone who is in the running for the most horrible character on this show, who is played by the talented Mare Winningham. This was Winningham's first of 4 AHS roles, and by far her most unsettling, as you'll see later on. She tells Zoe that after Kyle's father had died, Kyle started to pick up the workload, taking on a tutoring job and helping around the house. Alicia then confesses that the moment Zoe called her, she was about to kill herself. So now she thinks Zoe's saved her life. At the house next door to the Robichaux's, a new family has moved in, and the shirtless guy catches the attention of Queenie, Nan, and Madison. His name is Luke, and he is played by German actor Alexander Drayman, and his mother, Joan, is played by the acclaimed Patti LuPone in both of their first AHS roles, with Patti later returning in AHS NYC before essentially saying she'd never do the show again. Inside Robichaux's, Delphine Lalaurie sobs as she watches a speech by then-President Barack Obama.
That magic box lies. They just said that Negro is the president of the United States.
I voted for him, twice.
Lies.
Fiona presents Lalaurie with a maid's outfit, and the once slave-torturing socialite is very apprehensive about her new role, but as Fiona says, it's either this or back in the box. When Queenie sees her again, for the first time since Delphine literally knocked her out, things escalate when Delphine says,
"You're the bitch that blindsided me with that candlestick."
How dare you open your foul mouth to me, negress?
Before things get physical again, Fiona intervenes and declares that Delphine is now Queenie's personal slave.
There's nothing I hate more than a racist.
Fiona, look in the mirror. This was you nearly 20 minutes ago.
You want to tell me that some illiterate voodoo slave girl gave me my crown?
Zoe visits Kyle at Misty's shack, and she's amazed at the healing powers of Louisiana mud. But Kyle's still not speaking. Despite Misty saying he's not ready yet, Zoe takes Kyle back to his heartbroken mother. Madison and Nan then go next door to meet their new neighbors, but things get tense and magical when religion gets brought up.
I forbid you to talk to my son or to set foot in this house again.
On the way out, Madison sets their curtains ablaze.
I didn't know you could do that.
Neither did I until now.
At separate doctor's appointments, Cordelia is told she cannot have a baby, and Fiona is told that she has cancer. Then Zoe takes Frank and Kyle to his old house, leaving him at the door and ditching. Then, in an egregiously uncomfortable scene, Alicia realizes that Kyle's got different body parts when she walks in on him taking a shower, and later she tells him that he's still her beautiful boy, and she proceeds to make out with him before raping him. Kyle, by the way, has yet to speak a single word since regaining life. Joan later brings Fiona a copy of the Bible and tattles on Madison and Nan.
Arson?
The trashy one lit my curtains on fire. I don't know how she did it, but she did it.
I conjured the devil.
Testing her skills after Joan left, Madison lights Fiona's cigarette. Cordelia then visits Marie Laveau's hair salon, seeking her powers to solve her infertility. While Cordelia is pleading with her, she sits on an elaborate throne while playing solitaire on her iPad. Marie plays along for a while, but then says she wouldn't use her magic on her ever, since she was born into the wrong tribe.
You the daughter of my sworn enemy.
I'll take this as a moment to bring in the real historical account of Marie Laveau. There's a YouTube channel called New Orleans Tours by Foot, and they have a couple videos exploring the history of New Orleans voodoo, including the fact versus fiction of the real Marie Laveau. So I wanted to bring in an excerpt from their Marie Laveau video that essentially details how the character in AHS has very few things in common with her historical counterpoint.
One of my favorite things about doing these kind of tours and these videos is talking about stereotypes. I love breaking stereotypes. And I'm gonna start us off with one of the very famous stereotypes about this woman. Thanks to the TV show American Horror Story Coven, Mademoiselle Marie Laveau is said to be the most powerful voodoo queen in New Orleans. She had all these resources available to do her black magic and do things to people that she didn't like. That's funny to me. So what about you?
Well, if we're talking about American Horror Story, which then we would have to talk about the fact that in American Horror Story, they have her interacting with Delphine LaLaurie, which she probably never interacted with.
That did not happen because Mademoiselle Marie Laveau, which we'll talk about more, is a free woman of color, which means that her status would not have had her interacting with Delphine LaLaurie at all, actually. Now, we're actually heading to where her house used to be. A lot of people still come to her house like all the time, and they pray, they kneel, and they ask for favors from Mademoiselle Marie Laveau. Her voodoo practices. That's another thing that y'all want to know about, right? Was she a voodoo queen? Was she not a voodoo queen? Was she in the religion? Did she practice voodoo? Again, back on that. I don't know. Nobody knows. There's no historical record saying that this woman was in or out of voodoo. We know she was actually Catholic. Now, some of you who are actually Vodou-Wazan know that we use Roman Catholicism as a face to hide the fact that we're praying to our African spirit, but we still don't know if that's something that she was doing. Was she really good at hiding the spirit that they really thought that she was an actual Catholic and they buried her in St. Louis Cemetery number 1?
We do have 2 newspaper articles of her in relation to voodoo, and only 2 newspaper articles. So from 1820, when people say she started to become a voodoo queen, to the 1870s, from 1820 to 1850s, we got nothing. There's nothing happening with her. She's not in any record. There's nothing to associate her with voodoo. That doesn't change until around 1850 when they start really persecuting voodoo here in the city of New Orleans because we're hurtling towards the American Civil War. And race relations are disintegrating rapidly in the city. And so she is listed as a complainant in the 1850s, and she's making this complaint against the 3rd Municipality Police Force, which is basically the Marigny neighborhood today. And she's saying that they were harassing some co-religionists, that's the newspaper's word, and that they take a wooden statue that belonged to her. And now when the newspapers write this up, they write this wooden statue up as being the Virgin of the Voodoos, and then they try to like punch it up and make it as mysterious and weird as they possibly can. Because they're gonna say it looks like something that's a cross between a centaur and an Egyptian mummy. And so that's basically what they're playing to their audience. And they say she can have the statue back if she pays for it. And what happens is a bunch of the women come together with the money, and it's not really known if she gets it back.
A lot of people think that we actually pray to her in voodoo, in West African, Haitian, and Louisiana voodoo. Believe it or not, we don't. She's not a Loa, she's not an Orisha. And what does that mean? That means that she's not an elevated spirit in our traditions. Most times when you hear people talking about her that way, it is something that's just dear to their hearts and they decide to do. But then the actual religion itself, we don't have her as a spirit. People who are born and raised in New Orleans choose to pray to her, and they choose to keep her spirit alive in that fashion.
I think people believing that is again a part of the Hollywood perception, not only of Marie Laveau, but also of the religion of voodoo. Because Hollywood just throws it all in there. They throw like black magic in, they throw European witchcraft, they throw hoodoo all in under the header of voodoo, and they have no idea what they're talking about.
Yeah. It's the same way in a lot of traditions that you see, even outside of voodoo, where people would actually set up an altar to a deceased loved one, someone in their family who they're close to who just passed away recently, and they leave their favorite foods and they leave their favorite items that they had when they were alive, and this person knew them. That's the same thing that's actually happening here. There's a rumor, story, history, whatever you want to call it, depending on the family you come from, of her being a hairdresser. Now, the story goes that Mademoiselle Marie Laveau did the hair of a lot of people of high status in the French Quarter, specifically, of course, women of high status. And while doing their hair, they never paid her any mind, simply because she was a black woman doing hair. Who's going to believe her if she says anything anyway? She's no better than the furniture, etc., etc., etc. Now, the story goes that with this information she was gathering from these women through time, she would blackmail them in the future.
She probably really wasn't a hairdresser. Like, that comes into print because of George Washington Cable. And he puts it in a novel in, 1880, I think. And in the novel, he has a character that's a voodoo priestess, and he has her being a hairdresser. And most people just assumed he was modeling it after Marie Laveau, but there's no evidence for that. And then in 1895, there's a newspaper article in the Times Democrat where they say absolutely, though they can't support this as fact, that he did model it after Marie Laveau and that she was a hairdresser. But in all of the city directories, they list her occupation as none. The 1850 census, they list her occupation as none.
There's some elements about her, and while we still keep her stories alive, where they come from, what happened, it involves around a subject that we kind of spoke about, but we didn't really go into detail about: racism. I know that's a very, very hard word to talk about, a very hard subject, and it's a trigger word for a lot of people, but that's what happened. Would you like to elaborate more about it?
Sure. I think when you look at where a historical figure's legend comes from, you have to look at the historical context of when the legend starts to solidify. And for Marie Laveau, it really begins to solidify during Reconstruction. And post-Reconstruction, pardon me. And post-Reconstruction is when you're going to see a really racist backlash happening in the city of New Orleans. And that is when voodoo is really going to start to be demonized. That's when you're going to see people referring to the ceremonies as bestial, as superstitious nonsense, as originating out of the jungles of Africa, as being orgiastic, devil worshiping, etc. And so what's going to happen with Marie Laveau is that her legend is going to sort of form around two camps, as it were, and they're two diametrically opposed camps. So there's one camp that calls her the voodoo queen, and that's a camp that's going to overly sexualize her, that's going to demonize her, that's going to say she leads the superstitions. Then there's a whole other camp that's going to say she was an herbal healer, she was never a voodoo queen, she was always a devout Catholic. And never the two shall meet, because you could not reconcile, these early writers could not reconcile the fact that she could be a voodoo queen and still be good. You had to redeem her somehow. So even the later, like late 1800s articles that are written about her, some of those journalists will come out and say things like, no, I talked to her when she was elderly, when she was aged and infirmed, and she said she had denounced this religion of voodoo and that she wholeheartedly would embrace Catholicism. Even her daughter, their only surviving daughter at the time of her death, was Marie Philomene, or Philomene, I never know how to say that. But at any rate, she's going to say that her mother denounced voodoo, that she was never connected to this religion, and that she was always a devout Catholic, trying to, again, I think, make some distance between a religion that is persecuted. And then, honestly, you keep going. I mean, you come into the modern era, you get to 1915, going into 1930s, and that's when the United States Marine Corps occupies Haiti. And anyone could write a dime store novel during this time. And so they are hearing stories, but they're not investigating these stories. And they're writing about what honest to God, you guys, if you're writing a dime store novel, it's the same people that you're marketing 50 Shades of Grey to. It's bored, unfulfilled housewives. And what do bored, unfulfilled white housewives want? Salacious things. The throbbing of the drums, the fear that white flesh could fall into dark hands.
If you want to take this deep dive further, I've linked to the full tour videos in the description. I highly recommend them. That night at Robichaux's, Delphine and Queenie face off with Bastien in his full Minotaur form, and Queenie finally discovers Delphine is the Delphine Lalaurie. Queenie tells Delphine to hide, and she lures Bastien to the greenhouse, and she sympathizes with what has happened to him.
You just wanted love, and that makes you a beast. They call me that too. But that's not who we are.
Queenie and Bastien then start to make love, but most of this plays out off screen. Alicia invites Zoe over, and before she gets there, she tells Kyle that she realizes she's possessive of him, but that she thinks they both need it. When she says that, Kyle gets up, and she begins to grind against him, which causes him to say his first word. No! Kyle then repeatedly beats his mother to death with a trophy while screaming no. Fiona gets close to Madison, suspecting she may be the next Supreme, and after a long, drunken night out, Fiona tells her this verbatim. She then attributes her own weakening health to Madison's increasing abilities. Fiona laments about her regrets as a Supreme before confessing to killing her Supreme, as we saw earlier. Then she asks Madison to kill her with the same blade, and when Madison refuses, they start yelling and Fiona slits Madison's throat. Once again bearing witness to another murder in the portrait room at Fiona's hands is Spaulding.
This coven doesn't need a new Supreme. It needs a new rug.
First off, the show continues with a generous use of fisheye shots, which these sets are built perfectly for, and the entire camera department did an excellent job executing this season's unique visuals. Episode 3 also introduces another rape storyline as it reveals Kyle's mother sexually abuses him. By the end of the episode, it is again turned into a revenge storyline. And in Alicia Cross's paper, she again notes how the rape-revenge dynamic is atypical. She writes, rather than a scene of catharsis, this violent scene works to prove that in his zombie state, he has no control over his emotions or actions. Although this scene gives a sense of poetic justice, as with Madison's revenge, Kyle's is not the deliberate act of a victim avenger. That role is solely Zoe's. It's an extremely dark subplot in an already dark storyline revolving around Frank and Kyle. But thank goodness the character of Kyle's mom is done for. Speaking of dark, Madison Montgomery is murdered by Fiona in this episode. It's a pretty great scene, and the flashbacks to Fiona's murder of Anna Lee were a brilliant way to bookend this episode. I'd also say that the episode does not miss a beat with the casting of the flashbacks. Young Fiona is perfect. The casting choice, I think, highlights the similarities between Fiona and Madison as characters, which of course I think adds a lot to the events of what happens between them in this episode. It is also through these flashbacks that the history of the Supreme is explained, and I think 3 episodes in, we finally have a groundwork for where this season is going, and I think they do a great job at explaining the process of the 7 wonders in a digestible way. Let's just hope they don't introduce anything too confusing to the witch lore in the coming episodes. I love Halloween-themed episodes of television, and Coven's Halloween episode is certainly one of the most memorable, with zombies, beasts, and a surprise visit by the Witches' Council. The episode begins with a flashback to 1961 in the middle of the civil rights movements, where after Cora, a hairstylist at Laveau's salon, sends her son off to his first day at an integrated school, he ends up murdered and hanged by a group of white men. Afterwards, Laveau conducts a spell that raises several corpses from their graves. These zombies then hunt down the 3 men who murdered Cora's son, all of whom die a bloody death. In the present day, we get a look inside Spaulding's quarters, where we see he is an avid doll collector. His tea party is interrupted by the events of the previous episode, where he witnessed Fiona slit Madison's throat. Directly after, Fiona instructs Spaulding to dispose of her body, and after hearing a commotion outside, Fiona finds Queenie in the greenhouse, where her intercourse with Bastien in Minotaur form resulted in a horn through the stomach. Despite the initial scene depicting the beginnings of what looked like consensual sex, the encounter between Queenie and Bastien is never brought into the light, and it is referred to by others as an assault and an attack. Fiona wakes Cordelia to help tend to Queenie's wounds, and they both concur that the Minotaur was sent to them by Marie Laveau. With both of their visits to Laveau's salon now out in the open, Fiona scolds Cordelia for portraying her and Fiona's powers as weaker than Laveau's.
You went there first. I went there to show strength, and you undermined me by showing belly.
Queenie's breath stops, as does their bickering, and Fiona is able to literally breathe life back into her. Fiona says that Queenie shall not go to the hospital and that all conflicts shall be handled internally for the sole sake of not catching the attention of the Witches' Council. Good luck. Fiona briefly catches up with Delphine, who is trying to wrap her racist mind around Queenie saving her from Bastien, and she asks Fiona if he will return.
He won't.
We immediately find out how Fiona dealt with Bastien that night, as the next day, while Marie Laveau is doing the hair of none other than an older Cora from the opening scene,
Cora, you look beautiful.
she receives a package containing the severed head of the Minotaur. Catching up with Frank and Kyle, things are still not going well as this guy is suicidal. And while Zoe contemplates poisoning him, he escapes the house right as the kids start to hit the streets for a good old trick-or-treat.
Evil spirits will walk the earth this night. The dead shall rise and fearful pranks ensue should we fail to protect ourselves.
Oh, Christ. Just sip it. Who's the baddest witch in town?
Meanwhile, Marie Laveau begins to conduct the same spell she did in 1961 that made the dead rise, but her far younger co-worker Chantal reminds her of the tales of suffering that she grew up on, and how it was Marie Laveau herself who made peace with the Salem witches. This triggers a flashback to the treaty meeting between Laveau and then Supreme Anna Lee Layton. The truce consisted of the designation of land for both the Salem witches and voodoo practitioners.
Neither side crossed into the other. No more bloodshed at one another's hands.
I'm honestly speechless at this explanation. In the present day, though, Laveau declares that the truce is over and they need to fight back against Fiona's aggression. While away on a so-called business meeting, Cordelia's husband Hank is actually having an affair with a woman named Haley, played by Alexandra Breckenridge, in her second appearance in AHS after portraying the young Moira O'Hara in Murder House.
Happy Halloween.
Then, after a lot of low and mumbly romantic slop talk, Hank ends up pulling a gun on Haley, killing her. Not only does this come as a shock, this character was just introduced, it also continues to put a big sinister question mark over Hank and his true intentions and his true role in this season. Back in New Orleans, Queenie finally regains consciousness.
I don't know how to thank you for saving my life.
I guess you'll just have to work on that then, huh?
Then, like a random health inspection, the Witches' Council arrive at a very inopportune time.
How screwed am I?
Just breathe.
Aside from Myrtle Snow, we have Cecily Pembroke, played by Robin Bartlett, in her second AHS role after a guest spot in Asylum, and Quentin is played by Leslie Jordan in his first of 3 AHS seasons. Assuming the reason for their presence, Cordelia puts her foot in her mouth by informing them for the first time about what she says was an assault on Queenie.
Elaborate, elucidate.
Something potentially far more grave has come to our attention.
Oh, God. I should never have gone over there. I'm sorry.
Nope, Cordelia, not that. Fiona enters to shut Cordelia up, and to deliver backhanded reads to each member of the council. At last, Nan finally reveals that she summoned the council.
I can't hear her anymore. Madison? I think she's dead.
Thus, an investigation into the disappearance of Madison Montgomery commences, and Myrtle lets it be known that the punishment for a witch murdering another witch is being burnt at the stake. During separate interrogations, Myrtle seems to be pushing the theory that Madison's powers were growing, and she suspects that that is why she was murdered, even though they don't really know that she was murdered yet. While interrogating Fiona, Myrtle rants about how Fiona has neglected many of the formal duties of the Supreme over the decades, like not signing petitions and not appointing a new chancellor for over a decade. What? I wish we knew more about those duties. Myrtle says that 2 witches have gone missing under Fiona's eyes, her Supreme Anna Lee, and now Madison. We flash back to the then Council's investigation of Anna Lee's death, and it is here where we first learn that in this universe, girl witches are witches, and boy witches are called warlocks. A young Fiona manipulates the narrative, and also refuses to deny the possibility that the Supreme's death may have been at the hands of voodoo practitioners, even though they had just formed that truce. The Witches' Council then proclaim Fiona as Anna Lee's choice for the Supreme to follow her. To make it official, Fiona would then have to perform all of the 7 wonders. During this 1971 flashback, we also get a look at a young Myrtle Snow, played by Michelle Page.
She'll end up being the youngest Supreme in history. I can't believe she's getting away with it.
Getting away with what, dog face?
Murder.
Myrtle says she's the guardian of veracity in the vernacular. We get it, girl. You own a thesaurus. But basically, Myrtle's main powers lie within discerning the factual accuracy or truthfulness of someone else's words. So that night, she conducts a spell that enchants Spaulding's tongue, so he is incapable of telling a lie. She then tells her pal that the council will be interrogating Spaulding in the morning, and then the jig will be up for Fiona. But that night, the girls find Spaulding on the bathroom floor with his tongue cut from his mouth. Back in the present day, Myrtle Snow calls Spaulding to be interrogated once again, only now for the disappearance of Madison. But unexpectedly, she instructs Spaulding to write the name of the witch who is responsible for severing his tongue. And after lots of dramatic looks of suspense, Spaulding writes, Myrtle Snow. As another flashback elaborates, Spaulding clearly heard Myrtle discussing the enchantment she put on his tongue, so it was solely because of this and his undying love and loyalty to Fiona that he severed his own tongue. Myrtle, 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 why didn't you ask him to write down who killed Anna Lee or Madison?
This will not stand! You got away with it! She keeps getting away with it!
Cordelia interjects and says that Myrtle is wrong about Madison being the rising Supreme, since Madison had a heart murmur, and a sign of a young Supreme is perfect health. Later in his quarters, Spaulding dresses himself like a doll, and we see that he is now keeping Madison's corpse as a doll as well. Then, as the sun sets on New Orleans, Marie Laveau raises the dead, who soon show up to trick-or-treat at Miss Robichaud's, and Delphine recognizes one of the zombies as her daughter. While telling some truths with Fiona at a bar, Cordelia excuses herself to get sick in the bathroom, where she is approached by a dark figure. The figure then splashes Cordelia in the eyes with a jar of acid. This episode throws a lot at me that I frankly don't quite get. That truce made between Marie Laveau and Anna Lee Leighton seemed way too easy despite being a clearly uneven deal. And unlike the simplicity of the Supreme and the 7 Wonders as we previously knew it, there's also now this vague witch government lore surrounding the council and the roles of the Supreme that we never hear specifically about. And then of course all sorts of question marks about Spaulding and the remaining mysteries of the season. While some of it is clearly too simple, the episode does work with its emphasis on mysteries. We have one of dramatic irony involving Madison's disappearance, and the episode sends us off with one we can figure out alongside the characters who splashed Cordelia, not to mention the season-long mystery of who is the next Supreme. In what is by all intents and purposes a part 2 to the chaotic events of episode 4, Episode 5 begins with a flashback to Delphine Lalarie's party on All Hallows Eve, 1833. Delphine introduces her daughter, Borkita, to a potential suitor named Jacques, but challenges him to face her chamber of horrors first. This, of course, is not in reference to her torture chamber, but instead her festive haunted hallway, which happens to be decorated with real body parts of her victims. When Jacques runs off in terror, Delphine declares him unfit for Borkita. Later, Borkita and her sisters conspire to kill their mother for her cruelty towards them and the slaves. That night, Delphine has Borkita thrown into a cage in the torture chamber, breaking her leg in the process. Her co-conspirators are there too, revealing that Delphine was eavesdropping on their plan, and she says they won't be released till the next All Hallows Eve. In the present day, Delphine is horrified to see her daughters again, as it appears that just about everybody in the graveyard is now here on the front lawn. Boy next door Luke, who had come over to repay Nan's kindness right before the zombies arrived, believes it's all a Halloween prank, so he goes outside to confront the zombies. But by the time he realizes he's fucking with the real Walking Dead, he's got an axe in his back. Nan rushes out to help Luke, and she is able to get him safely into a car. While waiting at Cordelia's bedside and popping her entire supply of pills, Fiona goes on a hunt through the hospital for more. She comes across the mother of a stillborn, and she brings her back to life. Zoe tries to help Nan fend off zombies, while Delphine lets in her zombified daughter, Borkita.
Come back to me, child. I would make amends.
Borkita lifts Delphine by the neck and deals with her off-screen before hitting Spaulding over the head with a candlestick. Before Borkita could attack Spaulding further, though, Delphine recovers and kills her zombie daughter. Then, like a Sam Raimi film, Zoe finds a chainsaw in the greenhouse and starts chopping zombies left and right, saving her coven with the magic of power tools. One last zombie, though, catches her off guard and the chainsaw dies, but she is able to not only kill this zombie with her magic, but seemingly counteract Marie Laveau's spell entirely.
Nature. I don't know what that was, but they got some real power in that witch house now.
Hank visits Cordelia at the hospital, and after an argument with Fiona, Cordelia is awakened by a violent vision that is triggered by her husband's touch. The vision included glimpses of Haley, the woman Hank had an affair with before murdering her. While burning the dead, Delphine and Fiona relate to each other's bad parenting, but any alliance between the two is still far off.
Perhaps our shared tragedies will bring us closer together. I doubt it. You are, after all, the maid.
Did you think the episode forgot about the ongoing investigation into Fiona Good by the Witches' Council? Well, it has for 2/3 of the runtime, but now Myrtle, Pembroke, and Quentin are back, and they've ruled that Fiona must rescind her title of Supreme due to the disappearance of Madison, as well as the constant state of attack the Coven has been in since her stay at Robichaux's. And the council says that they will be overseeing the school until a new Supreme shows herself. But Fiona turns the tables on Myrtle, claiming to have seen her at the hospital, and claims that Myrtle tried to mold Cordelia into her own child simply because she couldn't have any. Fiona then claims Myrtle was already in New Orleans the night Madison disappeared. She also claims Myrtle has a secret creepy collage of Fiona hate. I love a creepy collage.
She's twisting everything.
So it's true.
Fiona then reveals that Myrtle's hands are injured, seemingly by the acid that was thrown on Cordelia. Without trial or true evidence, Pembroke and Quentin turn on Myrtle immediately.
You give us no choice. Burn the witch. Seconded.
The council and the Coven then attend to the burning of Myrtle Snow with the assistance of the council's secret service. Before Fiona lights Myrtle with her cigarette, Myrtle says,
"We're all a bunch of little toads in a pot that Fiona is slowly bringing to a boil. I'd rather burn than boil."
And then, much to the horror of the young ladies, Myrtle Snow dies at the stake. Afterwards, Queenie talks to Fiona in her room, asking if she just helped Fiona frame an innocent woman, revealing to us that Queenie had burned Myrtle's hand moments before Fiona removed Myrtle's glove.
None of us are innocent.
Queenie is having regrets for doing Fiona a favor, not realizing the consequences for her actions would be Myrtle's death.
I don't think I can do it. Live with this.
Fiona says that she's now taken the first step towards greatness, and stepping into the master manipulator role of Constance Langdon, she tells her that with Fiona's continued help, she could be the next Supreme.
Maybe that's what this coven needs. A Supreme of color.
Yeah.
Fiona instructs Queenie not to stray from her instruction, and Queenie agrees. Then, because nobody cleaned up after themselves, Misty Day is drawn to Myrtle Snow's corpse. And what do you know? She brings her back to life. If you haven't noticed by now, this season has a remarkably loose relationship with death. Characters you thought were killed off can be resurrected within the same episode, and that certainly puts a pin in a lot of the dramatic tension. That said, I enjoy this episode. It is a full-blown homage to zombie movies, specifically Night of the Living Dead, and I believe it's the only true overlap between AHS and zombies, which of course at the time of this episode airing were popping off, as one might say, over on AMC with The Walking Dead. Another horror show from AHS's era that is still existing in the world in some way, shape, and form. The episode continues the mystery of who will be the next Supreme, and after Madison appears to have been a red herring, this episode poses two powerful alternatives. Misty, the mass resurrector, and Zoe, who appeared to be able to counteract Marie Laveau's entire spell. We are now approaching the halfway point of the season, and I've got to praise the season's performances one more time. Like I said, it is a collection of the best in the business and the most celebrated in the business, as well as fan favorites from AHS seasons past. But from a writing perspective, I feel a lot of the characters are lacking definition, and they are still one note halfway through the season. Even the strongest performers, Lang, Bassett, and Bates, are given very one-dimensional characters that have yet to really break through to me like some of the other characters they've played in other seasons. Maybe it's the sheer amount of characters the season is dealing with, but I really hope throughout the next 8 episodes in part 2, our main ensemble will get to show some more layers, and I hope you subscribe and join me for part 2 when it drops. Throughout this deep dive, much like with Murder House, I feel like I am thoroughly exploring some of the stuff that never quite worked for me in these relatively strong and fan favorite seasons. So if this deep dive came across as too negative, let me know, and I apologize, but I do want to open the conversation up to you guys in the comments, especially some of that more difficult stuff, but also what you loved about the season. I'm currently working on part 2 of this deep dive, and I would also love to hear your thoughts on all of this. I would love to incorporate them in some way. And if you made it to the end of this video, I thank you so much for watching, and you can expect part 2 to drop sometime in January. Again, thank you, and I will see you next time.